Meanwhile, the International Organization for Migration has reported a disturbing new trend in people smuggling in Libya, with migrants being bought and sold as slaves. Libya is a focal point for migrants hoping to cross the Mediterranean to Europe. But the IOM says more and more migrants without identity papers and with no more money to pay smugglers are being openly sold into slavery. Migrants interviewed by the IOM report being prevented by people smugglers from reaching the Libyan coast and instead are being taken to town squares or parking lots where they are then auctioned off. They are held in warehouses or abandoned buildings and forced to work. Some migrants are even say they are beaten daily or made to call their families to demand ransom. The UN Refugee Agency has issued a renewed warning of the risk of mass deaths from starvation in Somalia, South Sudan, northeast Nigeria and Yemen. UNHCR spokesman Adrian Edwards says drought, conflict and a lack of funding means that an avoidable humanitarian crisis is fast becoming inevitable. He told reporters in Geneva that there are fears of a worse situation than in 2011, when a drought in the Horn of Africa killed more than 250,000 people. The UN has asked for $4.4 billion to address the problem, but has only received about $1 billion.
We are raising our alarm level further by today warning that the risk of mass deaths from starvation among populations in the Horn of Africa, in Yemen and Nigeria, is growing. This warning is in light of the drought situations that you've been hearing about that are also affecting many neighbouring countries, and a funding shortfall that has become so severe that an avoidable humanitarian crisis in the region, possibly worse than that in the case of the Horn of Africa of 2011, is fast becoming an inevitability. In the Doloado area of southeast Ethiopia, for example, acute malnutrition rates among newly arriving Somali refugee children aged between 6 months and 5 are now running at between 50 and almost 80%. This really is an absolutely critical situation that is rapidly unfolding across a large swathe of Africa from west to east. It does need most urgent addressing now from a really concerted international action. If you look just at the Horn of Africa crisis of 2011, 260,000 lives were lost during that crisis. What we want at all costs is to avoid a repeat of that kind of cataclysmic loss of life. What has to happen now is that funding has to come in so that the humanitarian effort can try its best to do something about this situation, but already it is very late.
That warning from the United Nations may affect up to 44,000 people in northeast Nigeria as victims of the insurgency face famine-like conditions in Borno and Adamawa states. Around 345,000 people are in need of humanitarian assistance in the Chad area. The World Food Programme, the WFP, says funds to address the prolonged humanitarian crisis are urgently needed.
Babagana May Abba made a living as a driver in Dikwa, Borno State, Nigeria, before Boko Haram insurgents took his belongings and burnt his house as they fled the town following a military intervention.
Boko Haram chased me from my home here. I fled to a nearby village. When I came back, I found that they had burned my house with everything in it.
Boko Haram's 7-year bid to create an Islamic State in northeast Nigeria has uprooted 1.8 million people. The World Food Programme, WFP, says some 4.7 million people face acute hunger in 3 states, likely rising to 5.2 million by June, and the situation is expected to persist until October. Abba, father of 12 children, collected firewood in the bush for sale before he was registered for handouts from WFP. Coordinating aid in the region has proved a major challenge for Nigeria. Experts say tensions have flared between the government and aid agencies over the scale of hunger in the northeast, which is suffering from a lack of funding from international donors.
They're pushing back on famine-like conditions in Borno State. where we have close to 2 million people who require immediate food assistance. Our major challenge right now across the 4 countries, northeastern Nigeria, Chad, Cameroon, and Niger, the first challenge is funding. In the next 4 to 6 weeks in northeastern Nigeria, we will completely run out of funds.
Chad, which is hosting thousands of refugees from Nigeria, is also struggling to cope with the numbers. Around 345,000 people are in need of assistance. Aid agencies face a double challenge: to think beyond traditional aid and find ways to help host communities cope with the ongoing pressure on their resources. WFP distributes cash in areas where markets are functioning to enable people buy a wider variety of fresh foods, and it helps the local economy. Insecurity has prevented farmers from accessing their fields, leading to significantly below average harvests in recent years. One factor pushing up this annual lean season to as early as May instead of July.